Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Talk Therapy. As always, I'm glad that you're here, alhamdulillah. So today I wanted to talk about a really interesting topic, which I think is very much needed. And I don't think we give it enough due course, and I don't think we explore it enough, unfortunately. And so, first, let's just explore spiritual bypassing our emotions. What is it? So, I have a quote here, and I quote: a spiritual bypassing or spiritual, sorry, a spiritual bypass or a spiritual bypassing is a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to step aside or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. So we have developmental stages, right? We know that as children, your consciousness at a 18-month-old self is not going to be the same as a 7-year-old or a 7-year-old to a 14-year-old. So we all have different developmental stages that we need to go through in a healthy way so we can master that stage, inshallah. So in actuality, spiritual bypassing is using spirituality as a means to build a false sense of security and happiness. And I'm sure we get this a lot, right? So whilst avoiding the very thing that spirituality is here to help us with, which is to encounter our shadow and our ego. So if we look at from Islamic perspective of the developmental stages of the soul, you could say we have the nature of the soul, we have the structure of the soul, stages of the soul, and then also developmental of the soul. So think of it this way. We have, there's various sort of variations of this, but just to simplify it. So we have the nafs, we have the aqal, the qalb, and the ruh. So in those, it's the self. And the self could have variations as well in that, but just think of the self as things that you've accumulated. So, if you were in an environment where maybe you weren't, it wasn't safe for you as a child, what you've done is you've had to adapt to that environment. So you've taken on these defenses or these defense mechanisms to survive in order for you to be able to, inshallah, exist, right? So you don't cease to exist and, die. So then what happens is as we get older, those adaptive at the time mechanisms that we've encountered or we've taken on as traits now become maladaptive as we get older. And this is generally what causes us a lot of the disturbance that we have, whether it's in relationships or various other situations that we find ourselves in. I'm going to share my screen for a second because this image would give us a perfect understanding of what I'm trying to say before we get into it, inshallah. So let's go into it. By the way, I hope you're all doing well, inshallah, and that you're all in the best of health. Okay, why is it not coming up now? I don't know. Could you tell me if you can see it or if not? Because generally when I screen share, unless, by the way, I haven't been on here for such a long time. So I'm trying to think, did things change on StreamYard? Okay, screen share was cancelled. Okay, so maybe you could see it. Let me go back. Screen share. I hope it does come up. Okay, so you might not be able to see it because it's not on here. I don't know what's happened. So I need to go back and look at it. Don't worry about that. So let's now just go into here. Oh, actually, maybe I can do it this way. Thank you all for tuning. Just bear with me a second. Chrome. It's not in here. But inshallah, I would say maybe look, I'll try and see if I can leave it in the link below. So there is an image that I have here of the 4 stages, which needs to come up. Now I don't know if I'd be able to share this. Do you know, I have a tendency to wanna share. Okay, I'm gonna leave it. So anyway, this stages is basically equivalent to Freudian. So if you go on Google, I think you'd be able to find it. So is Rothman and what's it called? It's very small print. Oh, I can't even see it. I'll somehow try to put it on if I can, or maybe find a different way and then come on again and then do it. But anyway, the perks of being live, alhamdulillah. So it's basically an iceberg. So if you've ever seen, so Freud, he's a pioneer in the Western psychology or the psychological sphere. And he's basically invented, you could say, what's called an iceberg. So he talks about the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious. So we've got like an Islamic understanding of this. I don't know if it originated from there or if this was, you know, something that came to be. I'm not really sure. But anyway, so it has an iceberg. So the top half of the iceberg, which I'm looking at right now, is the nafs, right? Which is the behavior. And this is the presenting problem that we seem to have, whatever that might be. Then underneath it, so just a little in the water, we have the cognition. And this is where you could say, you know, we have our mental capacity, our thought processes of the situation. And then underneath that, there is another part, and that is our emotions. Now that is the aql, right? Not the aql, the qalb. So the first is the aql, then we have the qalb, which is the heart. Then underneath that, we have the spiritual state, which is our ruh, our spiritual self. So with that, if you look at the Islamic model, it goes all the way down to the spiritual state, but generally with the Western model, it only sits on top of the surface, which is for the cognition. So you have the nafs, then the thought processes, and that's pretty much it. So in Islam, alhamdulillah, the harm of spiritual, what we're doing is spiritual bypassing, is actually very harmful to us as human beings, because like I said, we have all these different components to us. Our emotions are generated from the heart space. So I have a thought, whether that's positive or negative, but I have a thought. And if that thought is negative, what will happen then is I will have a feeling, right? And that feeling will create an emotion. And generally, the difference between feelings and emotions is that emotions only last for a very short space of time. Literally a very short span of time, we go through the emotional state. But our feeling, if we're ruminating, if we're constantly, you know, feeling depressed or anxious in those kind of different states, then what happens is that is now almost like a default. So we have a space where we're sitting with these emotions, these moods. So then our feelings create what's called moods. And those moods generally, if they're negative, are not helpful, because those are the things that create, you know, us to stop having fulfillment in life generally. So let's talk about definition. By the way, I can't stop thinking about my amazing image that I wanted to show, but hey, inshallah, you guys can check it out yourselves online. Just check out for an Islamic psychological model of iceberg or something like that, and it'll come up, inshallah. So definitions. So emotions are biological based and they are psychological states, right? And these psychological states brought on by neurophysiological changes. So we have these changes that happen. So variously, it's associated with thoughts, feelings, behavior responses, and a degree of pleasure or displeasure, which is what you could call our motivational system. So when we unfortunately bypass our feelings, what happens is we're not able to process them as we're meant to. So think of it this way, like I said, when you were younger, you experienced something, maybe you weren't able to cope with it or handle it a certain way because you didn't have the ability to process that emotion. So that emotion now gets stored in your brain. Now that information gets stored, it doesn't get processed properly. So like I'm sure we've all heard of, again, this is another reference to Freud, where he spoke about the notion of transference. So in this present moment, because I'm not able to be present right now, I am influenced of feelings and emotions from my past. So whatever that's happened that I wasn't able to process correctly, now it's affecting my present. So someone could say something to you, and generally how you know is if you're in a very reactive state. So if you're in a state that is very reactive, then that tends to be, especially when it doesn't, when it doesn't match the circumstances. If someone said something to you and now you feel completely, annihilated, or you're having all these negative thoughts, or your mood changes, all of those things are generally feelings that have come from the past. Or if you have fear, so sometimes when we start embracing Islam, wherever we are in our journey, what happens is we can use the ability to be able to really sit with these emotions and process them correctly. What we do is we avoid them. So we avoid them, and it shows up in things like, addiction. It shows up in binge eating or eating food. It shows up in not being able to express ourselves in the way we want to. It shows up in us not asking for our needs. It shows up in self-rejection. So we actually reject ourselves. Um, and the consequences of that is what we call regression, right? So we regress to a stage, or we suppress even or repress those emotions. So sometimes repressing is good when we're conscious of it. So we repress our emotions because, for example, we're in a situation, and if we spoke up, or if we said or done something in that moment could actually be quite detrimental to us and to our well-being. So it's better to be able to suppress, right? Repress those emotions because they're conscious. But then when we leave that situation, we can now process it on our own or deal with it. But I think a perfect example is people who, abuse their families, whether it's verbally, physically, or emotionally, is that, someone goes to work or they go out in the outside world, and because they can't say something, because they're put in a situation where they can't express, or, they can't tell the person, what you're doing. Imagine it's your boss, right? And your boss is very, bossy with you, and you can't tell them, hey, like, I've got a million other things that I need to be doing, but then they shout or they kind of speak to you in a very rude way. You're generally going to have that. You're not going to be able to express that in the moment, generally, because you don't want to lose your job, and because you don't want, negative consequences to come out of it. So then what you do is you hold on to it, but then when you come home, say your wife or your husband or your children, someone will say something or do something, and then now you would be very angry at them, or very dismissive towards them, because you're not present in the moment. So these are how those emotions sometimes show up. So it's really important to acknowledge them, because sometimes I think with spirituality, from my experience, it's meant to shine. In order for us to develop in a healthy state, for our soul to grow, and for us to be nurtured, we have to go through certain things. We have to experience certain things. And sometimes, we say, which we do in Islam, we know that when someone goes through a struggle or a trial, we say that, this is a form of testing from Allah, and this is also a purification, right? So we see test as a way of purifying ourselves. But in those moments where we're being purified, it shows up as a way to give us an insight. So think of our emotions as soldiers, right? Our emotions are soldiers, and they have something to tell us or to teach us in order for us to do something. So in that moment, maybe it could be you being grateful, maybe you accepting the circumstances that you find yourself in. Maybe it requires you to take action and to do something about it. Like, for example, anger is a really healthy, if it's done and processed in a healthy way, anger is a positive. It's not a negative, because sometimes you have to stand up for injustice. So if you suppress your anger, then how are you going to stand up for injustice, right? It doesn't make sense. So it's really important to know that these tests and trials that we go through, it's not in a way where Allah's upset with us or Allah's trying to punish us, or whatever it is. It's because there's an imbalance. Something is imbalanced within our psyche, within our soul. And in order for us to balance that out, what we need to do, inshallah, is look for the growth in that situation. So suffering is actually a positive thing, because it helps us to create balance. It helps us to get into a state of equilibrium, right? It helps us to get to a state of spiritual awareness, inshallah. So let's then delve a little bit more into emotions. So emotions reflect the meaning of their object for the subject. So think of us as, I'm the subject right now, and the laptop, my speakers or whatever, microphone is the object. So our emotions also seem to involve our desires, or at times give rise to them as well. So, for example, we glare at someone with whom we are angry. Another one would be, on the other hand, if we develop a fear when we are approached by a dog, or a dog that's barking. And this helps us, or we have the desire to flee from the situation, because the dog might come and chew up our leg or something, or eat us, or bite us. That's the word, not eat us. So our emotions of fear has now in that moment created our desire to flee. So emotions are complex reactions. So the reactions are very complex, and they also have an effect on our bodies as well. So these reactions include a subjective state, such as anger, anxiety, or love, an impulse to act, such as fleeing or attacking, whether or not it is expressed overtly as well. And really, there is profound changes in our bodies. So you'll probably notice that there is an increased heart rate or blood pressure. Some of these bodily changes prepare us to either sustain a coping action, or something else, such as change our body gesture in that moment. So it could be posture, facial expressions, communicating to others what we are feeling or what we want them to believe we are feeling. It's also difficult to define what emotions are, as they can be interpreted in various ways. So again, you might be going through grief, and I might be going through grief, but your experience of grief and my experience of grief are going to be very subjective. They're going to be very different. They're not going to be the same, because we've seen people who have gone through life, some really horrific things, but they've triumphed, right? They've progressed, they've achieved. But then there's people that have gone through the same things, but it's impacted them in a very different way. So no two people are the same. And, if someone comes and says, I feel sad, you don't exactly know what that's, the sadness of that person's experience. You can empathize with them, so we can have empathy, and we can tune into a time where we were sad, and be like, oh wow, yeah, that was actually a good experience. I remember feeling that way, and give that person the opportunity, hopefully, to share with us, what's their understanding of sadness and how it shows up for them, because we're very different, unique, individuals. So our emotions may often be brief and occur occasionally, and at times it's irregular. They can lead us to call what's called an emotional experience. So it leads us to an emotional experience that may include our thoughts, beliefs, or desires. So thoughts, I don't like this experience. This is overwhelming. The belief could be, generally we form our beliefs from childhood. So it could be that, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I can't cope. Therefore, I'm going to be rejected. And a desire could be to express, outwardly or inwardly, whatever the desire is for you. So reflecting and revealing our values is what our emotions can help us with. So they refine them for us, as well as play a major role in our search for meaning. So whenever our sense of meaning feels threatened, our emotions appear. What we experience reinforces our sense of meaning. So can you see how it's a cycle as well? So we experience happiness, therefore the meaning that we hold for this world and the next are essential to our emotional health. Emotions can be basic, innate, automatic, and open to cultural and microcultures as well. Contempt could blend with anger and disgust. All emotions may be complex, combining several emotions at the same time. Frustration could be you could amount it to anger or combine it with a feeling of nothing, like nothing can be done, and almost a despair feeling. So in signaling an emotion or evaluation, expressions of emotions aim to inspire the same or corresponding emotions in others, such as admiration, sympathy, curiosity, amusement, guilt, or shame. Emotions may involve psychological responses, such as the rise of, like I said before, the heart, the increases to muscle tension, perspiration and goosebumps or stiffening of the body, sensation of movements, opening of the eyes, and flaring of the nostrils. Emotions then may involve bodily modification, so perception, cognition, desire, and so forth. How emotions helps us to, so how does it help us to survive and flourish? So emotions mobilizes us and providing added strength and endurance in emergencies. So for example, the blood supply is increased to the brain, larger muscles of the body with anger and fear, but reduce to the digestive tract where when we're active, because it doesn't need it to be active. It needs, in an emergency, we don't need our digestive tracts to be working. What we need is, the muscles in our legs or our arms to be pumped with blood so we could either run away, flee, or fight. Also, heart rate and blood pressure rise in these emotional states, making it easier for us to fight or flee. Powerful hormones are secreted into the bloodstream, which markedly change our metabiological activity, helping us to sustain energy over the period when is needed. So when we experience an emotion, our mind evaluates it and it concentrates its attention on the energy and what might be done in order for us to cope with this. Our attention becomes reverted, the danger and how to evade or otherwise deal with it. We become inattentive to whatever else that we were doing. So we literally hone in that moment in order to survive, including what we had previously been doing or concentrating on. And this is really to help us to be able to survive and, inshallah, overcome whatever test or situation that we find ourselves in. So arousing our emotions. So a noticeable similarity between motion and arousing our emotion is that they are both linked to energy and intensity instead of information or direction. Another one is that while cognition seems to be wrapped up in coldness, emotion and motivation are often associated to pressure and heat. Hence why, when someone gets angry, they become very heated. We use that terminology, right? Yet another similarity is that both psychological constructs rely on the relationship between an individual and his environment. So, for example, a quote from the Quran, 27:17, is so Solomon smiled as one who laughed at it, saying, and he said, and I quote, "My Lord, arouse me that I give thanks for your divine blessings, with which you are generous to me and ones who are my parents, and that I do as one is accord with morality. May you be well pleased and cause me to enter by your mercy among your servant ones in accord to morality." End of quote. So the reason I mention that is because in order to arouse an emotion, a situation must involve either personal harm or threat, harm or benefit, not threat, by relating to something we want or something we don't want to happen. We seek a personal meaning with an event or encounter, and it either helps or threatens this. So, how we evaluate this personal meaning, whether actual or potential, will determine whether the emotion will be positive or a negative one. So, 6 psychological aspects of emotions and what motivates them include personal goal, self identity, appraisal, personal meaning, provocation, action tendencies. So first, let's look at personal goal. So in emotional situations, we are motivated to gain something or prevent something unwanted from happening, which is not the case in a non-emotional state. So 2 motivational factors are necessary to arouse an emotion, and that's an event must transform a routine encounter into one that involves personal pleasure, something that we want or do not want to happen. Then it's we want something to happen, and the other person is either threatening this or frustrating us or frustrating the attainment of that thing that we want. So the more we want the goal, the stronger the emotion. The way we judge the fate of the goal, whether actual or potential, determines whether the emotion will be positive, pleasure, or negative, harm and pain. So now the next one is self-identity. So this relates the other image where we have, what we where we have what we what we want or what we like, which is the personhood. So I have a desire for something. So this is I'm identified with the outcome. Maybe it would give me a sense of validation or a sense of accolade of some sort, a status or whatever it is. So it's self-identity. Then the appraisal is not just passively receiving information from the environment. It must also actively negotiate between personal agenda, that is the goal and the belief, and the characteristics of the environment. Okay, so the next one would be provocation. So there are 4 types of provocation. So a real event results in a particular harm or benefit, or the expectation of one of their outcomes. When the harm has not yet happened but is expected, it is called a threat. B, an event failed to move an existing harm or sustain a benefit that has been hoped for. C, an event forecasts a harmful or beneficial situation in the future and results in a positive or a negative emotion. So this is you forecasting it. Then the next one is D. A non-event can also result in an emotion if another person fails to say or do something supportive that had been hoped for. So that is the absence of something we expected. Something takes place in the present that serves as a reminder of what happened in the past. I referred to this, as Freudian terminology. He called it the transference. So most troubles and triumphs of our lives are not new, but tend to reoccur. They constitute the basic adaptation themes people have always struggled with: being loved or rejected, power or powerless, triumphant or victimized. And I think that's really important to remember. Whatever state that you find yourself in, is to ask these questions. In this moment, is it because I feel rejected? Do I feel powerful? Do I feel powerless? Am I in a victim state of mind? Because the thing is with being in victimhood is that there was a point in your past where you were, there was that injustification. There was that situation where you were a victim, but now you're in a place to be able to discern, and you're more grown up now. You have more capability, you have more understanding of things, you can keep yourself safe. You have more self-awareness, where maybe before you were limited, because as a child you depend on your caregivers to keep you safe, right? So that's also something to know, is that being in a state of victimhood it did happen. We can't ignore that. It did happen, something did take place. But now if you're carrying along what happened to you at that time, is to know that you now have an opportunity, inshallah, to outgrow that. Because like I said, our soul has different stages of development, and in order for us to develop, sometimes things will come and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will orchestrate a certain situation for us in order for us to overcome some of those unhealed wounds that we had, or even to overcome some of those limiting beliefs that we had. So it's really important to understand that when we have an opportunity, it's there for us to be able to grow. It's there for us to evolve, for our soul to be nurtured. We even say that the suffering of the nafs is actually a way that it nourishes the ruh. So it nourishes the ruh because it brings it luminosity, it brings it growth, it brings it intensity, inshallah. So then the last one is action tendency, and this is defined by what it will do for us. So psychologically, for example, getting away from danger, coping with action tendencies generated by an emotion is clearly important in a complex society where we need to be prudent about acting on our impulses. So coping with our emotions, working with our emotions, we can either evoke them or suppress them. We evoke them to bring up certain feelings. We suppress them to hide unwanted feelings. Emotion work is either done by ourselves or by others upon us. And what I mean by this is, maybe you're in an environment where someone will, activate something in you. Maybe you get angry, maybe you get irritated, whatever it is. So that's someone, like a situation being designed in order for that emotion to come up. And also it can, emotion work is either done by yourself or others, like I said, or upon you. It is done to reach a certain feeling that we believe we should feel. And inshallah, the feeling that we want to feel is to be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's our ultimate goal. So if we do not work on our emotions, we tend to repress them or practice self-deception. That's the really important thing that I want us to take away from this is that if we don't work on our emotions, they tend to, we repress them and we practice self-deception so that they remain unconscious to us. So now we're actually actively choosing for them to remain unconscious because maybe it's too difficult, maybe we don't have the skill sets to be able to deal with them, or we feel overwhelmed, or maybe we can't speak up because if we do, we're scared of, people's reactions to us, whatever it is. So we suppress them consciously, but that creates self-deception. So we might also engage in self-deception if an emotional experience is not tolerable by overlooking its intensity or misattributing its cause. Generally, blaming people as well, that's a really big one. We always say, this person caused me to feel this way. And generally, nobody can make us feel anything. We have that all that person did was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used that person as a tool to activate something that was in your unconscious. So now you can deal with it however way, the situation warrant for you to deal with. So coping is what we do, and think in an effort to manage stress and the or emotions associated with it. Whether or not these efforts are successful, that again all depends on the accountability and the responsibility that is placed upon us, that we should inshallah be able to work towards. We know that in the Quran it's told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm trying to think of where did I put the actual verse. I think it was verse 12 maybe. Surah 12. Oh, here it is. No, it's not Astaghfirullah. It's Surah 13 verse 11, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that God does not change a people until they change what's within themselves. So this is now where we have responsibility and accountability for how we show up. And a lot of the imbalances that we have, especially emotionally, what they do is they create a psychological block. And that block is what creates this fragmented self. So we fragment. We're not, we don't have, we're not in unity, in sync with ourselves, with our emotions. Either we're running away, we're fleeing, we're suppressing them, we're repressing them, we're, blaming other people for it, whatever it may be. So it's really important to take accountability of that, inshallah. And I think this is something that we're all accountable for. And even if we think of, when we are going through states of, distress or unease, sometimes we focus so much on the situation, and we try to go and, control the external. So, we react whatever way, again, that comes up for us. But what we forget is that we have an inner self. There's an inner part of us where we can actually take control of this situation. And that is to, do whatever we need to do to be able to overcome it, inshallah, and deal with it. And know that, sometimes how we deal with things could, if it's not done in the right way, could actually be the reason why we find ourselves in this cycle of dysfunction and imbalance, because it's perpetuating. So we're already told that we have the power to do that, right? We have the power of how we show up. I once used an example that think of, going to Alton Towers or Thorpe Park in the UK, these theme parks, and then, or in America, like Disney World or what have you, and you go on a particular ride. Now, how the ride goes, if you're going on a roller coaster and how many loops that it goes through or whatever, like, you're not in control of that. What you're in control of is how you show up. So you're in control of, whether you enjoy the ride or you don't. You're in control of, your reframing of that experience for yourself. So two people can go through exactly the same thing. Someone could look at it as, oh my goodness, this is, opportunity for me to do my inner work, for me to be able to overcome and see the imbalances. And also, I just wanted to say, actually, while we're on the talk, is that, you know, to maintain an imbalance is not focusing on the negative traits, because this is also something that we do. But instead, the way we find balance is to concentrate on the positive. So if we concentrate on the positive traits, which is often the opposite of the negative, then this is what we should replace them with. So when we think of transformation and overcoming certain experiences, is understanding that that situation is there because there's an imbalance. So in that balance, you know, what do I need to create? So if, for example, a situation is really difficult for you to accept, because we know the various, you know, the six articles of faith, is that sometimes things happen, but we might not be able to, you know, see the blessing in it, or the goodness, or the opportunity in that moment. And there's also a surah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about like how when we go through situations in life, there's actually two blessings, right? There's a blessing within the storm of, you know, our, I guess, our opportunity to rectify what's showing up for us, maybe the negative trait that we might have, where we show displeasure to Allah, or, you know, ungratefulness, or, you know, jealousy or envy, or, you know, the diseases of the heart that sometimes we can have. Or it's an opportunity for us to be able to you know, change that to what's the opposite of what I'm feeling right now. And instead of focusing on, you know, sometimes self-loathing, and, you know, we beat ourselves up and we shame ourselves and we're very critical, all this does is it, you know, destabilizes sometimes. Sometimes what you need is to be that, you know, inner supportive self, the positive self-talk that we need to have, where we are very mindful of Allah, where we think positive thoughts of Allah, and also we look for the, you know, the opposite to that negative trait or that feeling that we have, and create that state of feeling within us. So, you know, if I'm feeling despair, I have the opportunity to turn that around, reframe that experience, and find the positive in it, inshallah. So there's loads of reasons why I think spiritual bypassing can be very negative. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you are all well, inshallah. Oh, Brother Jamal, I haven't seen you in ages. I hope you're well, brother, inshallah. So these are all the ways that we need to, and sometimes it's also easy, you know, to talk about salah, or for someone, you know, we look at people and we're like, you know, you're practicing, and, you know, you shouldn't go through things. These things are normal. It's very healthy for us to have this back and forth with our nafs, with ourself, because what it does is it intensifies the fuel for our growth, for our evolution, inshallah, for our, you know, shedding almost the old skin of the programs and the conditioning that we received, and also, inshallah, to be able to find our connection with Allah. Because a lot of these experiences that we have, because I heard a particular brother who actually is the one who I tried to pull up his what do you call it, his image of this, the psychological stages, the comparison to Freud, and he said something that was really insightful, and it made me look at things very differently as well. He said, you know, in our heart, we sometimes forget, because we think, oh, the black dots that we get in our heart is sin. And yeah, that's true, right? If we sin, we get a black dot in our heart, and we need to go into a lot of istighfar, you know, asking for forgiveness, and doing the purification on our heart, inshallah. And he also said that, you know, also trauma. So, you know, if someone's gone through something really horrific, or has gone through something really difficult as a child, that also puts a dot in their heart. And we know what these dots do is that it's a covering, right? It covers the reality of our existence. It covers who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. It covers our eternal existence. who we are as a soul. And all of these things are things that we need to work on constantly to be able to cleanse and purify, inshallah. Okay, inshallah. That would be, I would be honored, inshallah. Let me know how to, maybe email me if you can, and then we can talk again, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. I hope you are all well, inshallah, and that you're having a blessed day. And yeah, hopefully, inshallah, this was of benefit, and I will catch you guys soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bye.